The deal closed at 2:14 p.m., and the seller handed you a brass key shaped like a tiny trophy. For one afternoon, it felt deserved. You had bought a 26-year-old plumbing company with steady service work and loyal commercial accounts. Purchase price was $2.9 million. Your down payment was real. The debt was realer. The company had 18 technicians, 7 apprentices, 12 trucks, and a dispatcher who knew half the city by voice. Revenue looked boring in the best possible way. Broken pipes, water heaters, tenant improvements, small commercial repairs, emergency calls. Nothing about the spreadsheet looked dramatic. That was exactly why you liked it. The seller, Frank, kept saying the business did not need him anymore. You wanted to believe that sentence. During diligence, one name appeared more than expected. Calvin, the licensed master plumber attached to most permits and inspections. Frank described Calvin as steady, quiet, and not political. Your lawyer called him a key employee. You added a retention bonus to the closing checklist, then let the urgency of financing push it down the page. That was the first mistake, not because paperwork was missing, but because trust was missing. On day 17 after closing, Calvin walked into your office holding an envelope. He did not sit down. He said he was leaving in 2 weeks for a competitor across town. You asked if it was money. He said, partly. Then he said the part that mattered more. Frank had promised him a path to ownership for 6 years. Nobody told you that before closing. Calvin said he respected you, but he was tired of being essential only when someone needed a signature. The envelope stayed on your desk after he left, small and heavy like a bill you had not modeled. At first, you told yourself the company had other plumbers. It did. Then your operations manager, Denise, explained the real problem. Other plumbers could do jobs. Calvin was the licensed person the municipalities recognized for permit-heavy commercial work. Without him, several jobs could continue only under strict supervision, and some new permits could not move. The calendar changed color in 1 hour. Green jobs turned yellow. Yellow jobs turned red. A restaurant build-out worth $86,000 paused before rough-in. A medical office job asked for revised supervision documents. 2 property managers wanted confirmation that emergency work would not create compliance problems. Your first week as owner had been about learning names. Your third week became about proving the company could legally operate. The bank did not panic, which somehow made the call colder. They asked for exposure, booked work affected, revenue timing, payroll impact, covenant risk, and your plan to replace the license coverage. Payroll was $71,600 every 2 weeks. Cash on hand was $138,000. That sounded fine until you removed the delayed commercial billings. Then it sounded thin. You pulled Denise, your controller Nia, and the service manager into the conference room. 3 columns went on the board: service calls, permitted jobs, and jobs requiring direct licensed oversight. Service calls kept moving. Water heaters, leaks, drain calls, and emergency repairs became the oxygen line. Permitted jobs needed customer communication before rumors reached them first. Jobs requiring direct oversight became the danger zone. That zone held too much revenue and too much reputation. You called Frank at 6:40 p.m. He answered like retirement had already softened him. You asked what he knew about Calvin's ownership promise. The silence told you enough. Frank said it was complicated. You said complication was expensive now. The purchase agreement required transition cooperation, but it did not create a permanent license holder out of thin air. Lawyers could argue later. Payroll needed answers now. You called Calvin the next morning without anger, even though anger was available. You asked what would make him stay through a structured transition. He said money was not enough. He wanted authority, respect, and a written path that did not turn into another hallway with no door. That sentence changed the problem. You were not replacing a license. You were repairing a broken promise. You offered a temporary stay package, retention pay, decision authority over permit quality, and weekly transition meetings. Calvin declined the long-term role, but agreed to stay 45 days if the agreement was clean and respectful. That bought time, not safety. Time is useful only if you stop wasting it. You hired outside counsel to review every licensing and supervision requirement before touching the schedule again. You hated the legal bill. You hated the alternative more. The company had been operating correctly, but too much knowledge lived in Calvin's head and Frank's habits. You documented the permit workflow step by step: who reviewed drawings, who signed, who inspected, who corrected mistakes. Denise built a permit dashboard with every municipality, status, inspection date, and responsible license person. Nia rebuilt the cash forecast around delayed revenue instead of hopeful invoices. The first forecast showed a $94,000 cash dip if 2 commercial jobs slipped past month end. You stopped distributions immediately and froze non-essential spending before anyone could pretend the freeze was optional. Then came the recruiting market. Licensed master plumbers with management judgment were not waiting beside the phone. The first candidate wanted a huge salary and no accountability. The second wanted equity before understanding the business. The third, Maya, asked a better question. Will the first have real authority, or am I just replacing Calvin's signature? You knew there was a wrong answer. You also knew she would hear it immediately. You told her the truth. The business needed a license holder, but it also needed an operating leader. Maya requested 3 things: control over quality standards, power to stop unsafe jobs, and a training ladder for apprentices. Those demands were not expensive. They were mature. You offered strong pay, a performance bonus tied to inspection pass rates and gross margin, and a real leadership title. She accepted after meeting the team without you in the room. That part stung slightly. It also worked. Calvin trained Maya for 3 tense weeks. They were polite, not warm. Still, knowledge moved from one person to a system. That was the point. The restaurant build-out restarted with a revised schedule and a painful customer concession. The medical office stayed because Denise called them before they called you. Emergency service revenue carried the month. Not heroically, but enough. The bank received weekly updates with jobs affected, cash runway, recruiting status, and inspection progress. They did not praise you. They simply stopped sounding like they were preparing a file note. By month 3, Maya had changed more than the license problem. She standardized job closeout photos, tightened materials approval, and caught underpriced change orders before they became free labor. Some technicians grumbled because the old way was faster until it failed inspection. Maya did not argue loudly. She brought failed inspection costs to the Monday meeting. Numbers ended debates that personality would have stretched for weeks. You also created a key person map for every role that could quietly stop revenue. License coverage, dispatch knowledge, vendor terms, customer relationships, payroll approvals, software access, inspection history. The map was uncomfortable because it showed how much of the business had been held together by memory. Memory is useful. Memory is not a control system. You met Calvin for coffee the week after his last day. He seemed lighter. You thanked him for staying through the transition, and he nodded like he accepted only half of it. He said, "Just do not make Maya fight the same fight. You promised you would not." That promise became policy, compensation, and meeting agendas because kind words are cheap without structure. At the end of the first quarter, revenue was below the original model. Cash was tighter, legal fees were higher, and your confidence had lost its shiny new owner smell. But inspections were passing, permit delays were visible, and no single person could quietly hold the company hostage again. You bought a plumbing company and the license holder quit. What almost broke the deal was not bad plumbing, it was invisible dependency. The lesson was brutal and useful. When one person holds permission, knowledge, or customer trust, that person is not overhead. They are infrastructure, and infrastructure ignored during diligence becomes crisis after closing.